In our first story, Behind Mansion Walls,
He felt like the devil had walked in his door.
he was to the manner brawn. She had the face of an angel.
When we discovered what happened, this went from being a non-story to being the story.
And later,
He was going to inherit £15 million fortune.
the heir with a golden ticket is dealt a cruel hand.
A stranger had broken into the house and killed his wife.
I'm Christopher Mason. Being born into a wealthy dynasty can be a blessing and a burden. When you can afford to indulge your every whim, events can spiral out of control. Too much time and money, not enough common decency. Beware the heir to misfortune.
A beautiful girl, a bright future.
Her life was limitless. She was going to do great things.
Want to celebrate?
But Diana DeMayo is about to make a fatal mistake.
She made a bad choice. It cost her her life.
In gyms across the nation, Americans are sweating, and they're paying for it. Fitness is a $17 billion industry that's doubled in the last decade. 40 million Americans are health club members.
I got the sites for the 2 new gyms.
To those running the show, pumping iron is like printing money.
Looking at it from the outside, Peter Dabish had it all.
I want them open by the end of the month.
The scion of a major gym fortune.
Peter Dabish's dad muscled his way into the booming Detroit gym industry and made millions.
Peter's father had a bit of a passion with weightlifting, and he turned that into an empire that consisted of more than 300 gyms and apparel. A hugely popular gym franchise in the Midwest.
Now, his son Peter is a big fish, in more ways than one.
He was huge. Weightlifter. He was born and raised in the gym culture. He had the money. He had a nice car.
We found that he had a very privileged upbringing, very posh background he came from. He lived a very luxurious lifestyle.
In early 2010, moneyed and muscled Peter starts hanging out with his former classmate, Diana DeMayo.
They knew one another in high school. She went away to college to the University of Miami, and she did very well there.
Diana was just like a great kid. She was a million friends. Everybody wanted to be with her. She's just a magnet for people.
Now back in Detroit, Diana's renewed her friendship with Peter. She wants him to meet her dad.
So this is great.
So, Dad, we've got some pictures.
The couple has exciting news.
Good news?
Yes.
Diana has a dream of creating a rescue shelter for dogs.
No. You've been wanting to do that all your life.
I know.
Generous Peter is only too happy to front the cash.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Fantastic.
But while Diana seems the ideal all-American girl, everything's not perfect behind the scenes.
I knew she smoked pot, and I knew she took anti-anxiety medication because she had a little bit of anxiety.
Thanks for the animal shows.
Diana's bright future could be under threat from drugs. And the danger from illicit drugs is rising as the once great city of Detroit crumbles around her. Motor City has become Murder City. On the streets and in the decaying suburbs, there's a homicide every day. But Peter offers her an escape. An ivory tower, high above the dangers of the streets.
It was a very luxurious apartment Local athletes, sports stars, and celebrities reside at that apartment.
This is where Detroit's elite choose to live. People like gym tycoon Peter Dabish.
Every morning.
In March 2010, he rents a luxury apartment. Diana DeMayo helps him move in.
Oh my God.
It was a very nice apartment. There isn't a whole lot of upscale in Detroit, but this was definitely one of them.
This could be the perfect start for both of them. But just hours later, something goes wrong.
911, what's your emergency?
At approximately 6:19 in the morning, Peter Dabish called 911.
Yeah, I need some help.
And he indicated that Diana was overdosing.
Get in quick.
Peter said she overdosed on her anxiety medication and had fallen.
Injured and unconscious, Diana is rushed to the hospital. Her mom, Linda, receives the phone call every mother dreads.
We were told that it was a drug overdose. She was in Detroit receiving on life support. And I was like, can't be. You know, this can't be. And I just kept saying, you know, well, she'll come out of it, right? It's just a coma. She'll come out of this, right? They finally convinced me that she was never coming back.
And I think the family is faced with the worst decision any family could be faced with.
So we turned off the machines, and that was it that night, that Thursday night. It was horrendous for everybody. We were just all in shock. You know, it's just not what you ever think's gonna happen to your kid.
A week later, friends and family gathered to commemorate Diana's life.
There was maybe 500 people came through the wake. You know, they all just thought that she died, you know, of a drug overdose.
But is that the real story?
The day of the wake, the funeral director called me and he said, I just got the death certificate and it has a cause of death on it.
What that certificate says will shake Detroit to its foundations.
When we discovered what happened, this went from being a non-story to being the story.
To escape the mean streets of Detroit, some of the wealthy choose to live in sky-high luxury apartments, where the sirens are muffled and the gunshots far away. But up there in the clouds, they're not immune from tragedy or from crime.
In March 2010, in a luxury Detroit apartment, promising college graduate Diana DeMayo is found unconscious. She later dies at just 23. Her friend Peter Dabish tells a tragic story of her last moments.
He indicated that she was suicidal, that he had knives in the apartment that night, that because he feared that she was suicidal, he had taken all the knives and thrown them out of the window.
Peter says Diana had then taken a prescription drug overdose and had a horrific fall.
This was an overdose, potentially a suicide attempt. She had fallen.
That she was bleeding from her nose, she was bleeding from her eyes.
Come on, please.
And he needed help right away.
On March 11th, 2010, Diana dies in the hospital. A week later, there is shocking news.
The day of the wake, as I was driving there, the funeral director called me and he said, I just got the death certificate and it has a cause of death on it, and I just wanted to tell you. it's homicide. It was multiple blunt force trauma.
Peter Dabish believes coroners have made a terrible mistake.
He said that Diana had inflicted these injuries on herself by falling repeatedly.
What really happened that night? To find the truth, police rush to Peter Dabish's luxury apartment. They want to assess the crime scene, but there's a problem. It's clean and freshly decorated.
Because this case was not treated as a homicide initially, Peter was allowed free access to the apartment to come and go as he pleased.
Has Peter Dabish cleaned up the evidence of a crime? Weeks earlier, Diana's dad had dinner with his daughter and Peter Dabish. The gym tycoon didn't make the best impression.
Wait up. One.
He showed up late. He was stoned.
Yeah, just fill these up.
You know, looked like smoking pot. But he seemed maybe more than that.
Apologies. Do you want me to clean that up? Damn straight I want you to clean that up.
It's okay. It's just...
Okay.
There was friction between Mr. DeMayo and Peter Dabish.
Can you just...
He could just tell
You get up.
that Peter was not right for his daughter.
But you can't convict based on a father's intuition. If Peter Dabish is a killer, police need proof.
When the police did go back and start to investigate, they found that a cabinet door in the kitchen was removed and placed down into the storeroom. The police were able to go down, retrieve that door, and take it to the crime lab and determine that there were 3 distinct blows that impacted that door, causing the damage.
If the door was hit by Diana's head as she slumped to the floor, why were there 3 separate impact points? Cops dig up Peter Dabish's history, looking for anything that might suggest criminal tendencies.
Despite being raised with access to money and given much, he was always working a hustle, and drugs was one of them.
Turns out, if anyone has a problem with drugs, it's Peter Dabish.
Drugs, pot, other substances were a theme in his life.
On the surface, that makes Peter's story of Diana's overdose even more plausible. She wouldn't be the first girl to be launched on the path to addiction by her lover. But there's a problem with that theory.
The medical examiner did a complete toxicology screen on the body and blood of Diana DeMayo. No opiates, no cocaine, no alcohol, no stimulants, nothing. There was nothing in her system whatsoever.
So what did cause Diana's death?
They found blunt force trauma to her shoulder, blunt force trauma to her eye, and they found 8 distinct areas of blunt force trauma to her head, causing a massive brain injury and bleeding.
The findings suggest Diana came to a violent end. And the testimonies of Peter's ex-girlfriends suggest he might be responsible.
And the investigation revealed he had an extensive misdemeanor record. In the past, he had became jealous over relationships, and he threatened to kill his girlfriends. So we were able to track down those women, and even though the relationships were over, they were still terrified of Peter Dabish. They were scared to death of him.
For weeks, the idea that Diana's death might be a homicide goes unreported in Detroit. Television journalist Brad Edwards recalls hearing about the case for the first time.
It finally came into me as a tip from a cop source of mine that said, "You're not going to believe this one. You've got this young, effervescent, beautiful honors graduate and an heir to a well-known gym fortune, and their 2 paths crossed in that high-rise. And to think of what actually happened in this case is still hard to believe."
3 weeks after Diana DeMayo's death, Peter Dabish is charged with her murder. But some witnesses are too afraid to testify. Will the full story of what happened that night come out at the trial? And will prosecutors have enough evidence to lock away this privileged son?
And that was always a fear. He'd walk, and then the rest of our lives I'd worry about him going after us.
In 2010, Detroit is gripped by a story where wealth and violence collide.
Looking at it from the outside, Peter Dabish had it all. Probably the quintessential silver spoon in his mouth type story. But his arc started very early on to turn dark.
When Ed DeMayo first met gym tycoon Peter Dabish, an ominous feeling came over him.
Can we just go back to dinner?
Mr. DeMayo indicated that when he first met Peter, he felt like the devil had walked in his door.
And now it appears Ed's instinct might be right. On March 31st, 2010, Peter Dabish is arrested for the murder of Ed's daughter, Diana.
He really did have it all, but it's almost as if he was just predisposed to this darkness. You talk to person after person, they remark on how intimidating he was. There's no twinkle in the eyes. Dark. There's no life in the eyes, no glimmer.
Peter petitions for bail. His mom offers up her Farmington Hills mansion plus her mother's house as bond.
This is a young man who had known for years nothing but trouble. And when he was charged with first-degree murder, instantly, his mom put up the property to bail him out.
But despite Peter's mom's commitment, bail is refused. In the fall of 2010, Diana's mother, Linda, comes face to face with Peter Dabish at his murder trial. She prays prosecutors can make the charges stick.
He just looked just like a big, monster. I couldn't believe that he could do that to my daughter. Like she was so sweet. I don't know, and she's always helping everybody. She was helping him that day.
Dabish is not only facing the murder charge, prosecutors also want to hold him accountable for the suffering they say preceded it.
When a defendant inflicts cruel and extreme suffering on a person, you can charge torture.
The fact that it was first-degree felony murder and torture, that was upsetting, and I think that was only the second torture charge Detroit had ever had.
What did Diana go through that night? She's not around to answer, so it's up to prosecutor Lisa Lindsay to speak for her.
Peter had gotten into an argument with Diana concerning her contact with the bellman.
I saw you downstairs with the...
He believed she was flirting with the bellman.
You heard me. I saw you downstairs.
And he actually yelled and called her a whore.
You're a goddamn whore! You're a whore!
Abuse gives way to rage, then violence.
A young man with such rage attains this young, beautiful woman. And I don't think she was ever going to be able to get away from it.
Basically, he trapped her like an animal in a small corner of the apartment. Her injuries indicated that the beating happened over a prolonged period of time. This was not a rage situation where he beat her out of a rage and stopped. This indicated that it went on for quite some time.
To think of her, how scared she must have been when he first started hitting her. And my only thing that got me through it is well, maybe she passed out after the first blow and then he just kept beating on her. I don't know.
When emergency services arrives, Dabish blames the injuries on Diana herself.
Peter was apparently angry,
Even unconscious female, early 20s.
swearing at Diana to the officers,
Bitch overdosed. It's okay. It's okay, sir.
saying that she overdosed,
She fell, hit her head.
Although they suspect this isn't an overdose, emergency personnel are focused on saving Diana's life.
I'm calling the medical evacuation.
One of the main concerns, and maybe why there were so many apparent oversights early on, is that she was alive and the goal was to save her life.
When Diana's in the hospital, Dabish maintains the charade, trying to blame the fictional overdose on Diana's depression.
The only thing she overdosed on was Peter Dabish.
Meanwhile, prosecutors believe Peter cleaned up the crime scene, but didn't do a thorough job.
There was blood spatter in an isolated corner of the apartment, and there was also blood spatter on the ceiling directly above where that corner was.
At the trial, Peter Dabish's violent past is finally laid out for all to see.
The other thing that was really upsetting was to see the parade of girls take the witness stand that had already had protection orders against him. And almost all of them looked exactly like Diana to me.
Wealth might have protected him before, but this time, Peter Dabish can't buy his way out of trouble.
When the jury received this case, they were very quick to decide. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of torture.
So he was still, up until that point, he thought he was going to get off. And I think he was shocked.
Rich or poor, that type of person is destined to go to jail.
The judge sentences Peter Dabish to a mandatory life sentence, plus 23 to 80 years for torture. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars.
When she sentenced him, she said, this is a case of over-privileged, under-checked behavior for too long.
He was never held responsible for anything he had done until this point, and now he's paying the ultimate price.
For the mother of Diana DeMayo, justice is welcomed, but can never bring her daughter back.
Time helps, a little. I mean, I'll never forget her. It's hard for me when I see her friends, like, having babies and getting married and having careers and, you know, doing everything that she was supposed to be doing. That part's hard. My goal is to get young girls to understand that there are these people out there and they'll act really charming, but if they're being controlling and keeping everything secretive, there's a chance this could happen to you.
Diana DeMayo was fond of caring for stray beasts. She never expected that one of them would wind up killing her. Peter Dabish proves that a moneyed inheritance can spawn a bad seed. A seed that can flourish in a Detroit penthouse or an English mansion.
New Year's Eve, 1999. In London, England, Alun and Nadine Phillips have two reasons to celebrate.
Cheers. Happy New Year.
It's the dawn of a new millennium and their 7th wedding anniversary.
To the outsider, it would have appeared that the Phillips had a very happy marriage. They had an extravagant lifestyle. They had no money worries. They lived in a large house.
On New Year's Eve, 1992, Alun and Nadine had the perfect white wedding in the Royal Borough of Kensington.
They did have a very romantic start to their marriage.
They travel the world, then settle into wedded bliss in the distinguished streets of southwest London, just steps from the exclusive King's Road.
Nadine and Alun Phillips were upper-class people. They lived in Fulham, which is famously what we call a Sloaney neighborhood of London.
Oh, yes. Yes, and I love...
Alun Phillips, he was from a very wealthy family. His wife went to the gym at Princess Diana's gym, the Harbour Club.
You know, we met in Greece.
She certainly moved in those kinds of exclusive circles.
She was very charming, attractive, full of life, very sociable.
Incredibly, this fabulous lifestyle is all paid for by hot air.
Most pubs in Britain, when you went into them, had a hand dryer in them where you push the button and you dry your hands.
Alan's dad made $40 million from supplying hand dryers. When he dies and bequeaths his fortune, Alan and his wife will never need to get their hands dirty.
He was going to inherit £15 million fortune.
While they wait for the inheritance, the couple establishes a successful childcare business.
They were a wealthy couple in their own right. They'd recently sold a nursery for a significant sum of money.
Those had been sold for $2 million, and they had something like £400,000 in their bank account.
Oh, really?
Money in the bank and a huge inheritance on the way. By their mid-30s, the Phillips have a glorious future laid out before them.
From the outside, they did give the appearances of being almost the perfect couple. They had a beautiful house in Fulham, 3 happy, healthy girls, and as much money as most people could ever wish for.
But just over 4 months after this Millennium Eve, the Phillips' future will be in ruins. If there's a downside to being rich, it's that you also become a target. Alun Phillips is paranoid the walls of his £1 million mansion will be breached by thieves. Detective Inspector Mike Smith says the well-to-do heir went to great lengths to protect his family.
The house had bars on the windows, CCTV monitor on the door, multiple locks on the front door, an alarm system.
It was clear that Mr. Phillips was very concerned about the security of both himself and his family.
The most secure area in the lavish townhouse is Alan's upstairs office.
His room on the top floor was like a safe room. It had a really thick steel door to it with multiple locks.
On May 15th, 2000, Alan is working late into the night.
It was soundproofed. He could lock himself away in there and not know what's going on anywhere else in the house.
At midnight, Alan goes downstairs and discovers the front door open. It's unusual, but there's nothing to suggest an intruder. After locking up, Alan decides to sleep in his office. It's late. He doesn't want to disturb his sleeping wife downstairs. But tonight, nothing could wake his sweet Nadine.
English businessman Alun Phillips is indeed a fortunate man. Already worth millions, he's about to inherit another 20 million or so. But as this wealthy heir will soon discover, no amount of cash can cushion you from heartbreak.
Tuesday, May 16th, 2000, is a busy school morning, whether you're a multimillionaire or not.
Just make sure you're all set for today.
He got up in the morning.
Okay, what have you got for lunch today?
Dealt with the children.
Make sure you have this banana. It's very healthy for you.
The oldest one was collected by a bus driver and taken to school.
Hello, Tony. How are you?
He loved his kids. He was devoted to his children.
With his eldest daughter on her way to school, Alan goes to wake Nadine.
And he went up to his wife's room. And found her lying in the bath.
Darling. Nadine, what happened? Wake up, darling.
Mr.
Nadine.
Phillips had called the London Ambulance Service just before 11 o'clock in the morning to report his wife collapsed in the bath.
My wife, she's lying in the bathtub and she's unconscious. No, she's
The
not breathing.
paramedics deduced from the rigor mortis that she'd been dead for some hours.
At first, Alan can't recall anything unusual about the previous evening.
I don't know what...
He said he'd been in bed from early evening in his room on the top floor while his wife and children slept on the first floor.
The young mother is pronounced dead from drowning. But Detective Sergeant Steve Smith soon realizes this is no accident.
Upon examination of the body, we found some linear bruising towards the top of the arm above the elbow, which we couldn't really interpret what had caused those marks.
Alan can't explain the marks either. Then he remembers something. Last night, there'd been an unexpected visitor at his mansion door.
Alun Phillips' story to the police was that the night before, at about 8:30, there'd been a knock on the door from a black man who he described as an evil weirdo.
I brought you firewood, you never paid me. I brought you firewood.
He said that his wife had had an altercation with an Afro-Caribbean man sometime during the evening.
Suddenly, Alan recalls something that happened later that night. Something that seemed unimportant at the time, but may now hold deadly significance.
He had described finding the door open. He suggested that an intruder had got into the house.
Did the stranger return in the early hours and gain access to the Phillips mansion? Could Nadine's death be the result of a botched robbery attempt?
It was early to late evening. She was getting ready for bed when she was attacked.
Upstairs, alone in his soundproofed office, Alan wouldn't have heard a thing.
He was alone in bed on the top floor and came down in the morning to find his wife lying in the bath, so somebody must have broken in and committed the offence.
It seems the worst fears of security-conscious Alan have been realized. And the safety of this silk-stocking neighborhood has been pierced by a killer from the outside.
Fulham's an affluent area, very rarely has any serious crimes.
But just a year earlier, just a mile away, in one of Britain's most shocking unsolved crimes, wealthy celebrity Jill Dando was murdered on her Fulham doorstep. Is there a deranged killer stalking Fulham's well-heeled women?
Police made extensive inquiries in an effort to establish whether or not there were any active nighttime burglars in the area or whether any intruders had been disturbed in the locality.
Police start searching for an outsider. But could there be a simpler explanation? Could the killer be someone closer to home?
He said the marriage was perfectly happy. He loved his kids, was devoted to his children.
Cops ask Alan if his marriage was so perfect, why were they sleeping in separate beds? Alan says it's because he's a light sleeper.
He was only spent one night a week in his wife's bedroom because he couldn't bear the noise of the children.
But there's another reason they weren't sleeping together. Friends tell cops that 3 years earlier, Alan caught his wife cheating with a city financier.
Nadine had had an affair. This was something which enraged Alun Phillips.
So, although the outward appearances were nice and happy, inwardly, obviously there was problems at home.
It became apparent from the testimony of friends that trust was never really re-established between the two, and the marriage remained in I think, a very tense and difficult state.
She told a friend she wasn't happy in the marriage and she'd actually consulted a solicitor about a divorce.
Divorce? For Alan, that could mean sharing half his inheritance. Are police honing in on a motive for murder? Meanwhile, a forensics team examining Nadine's body are still pondering the cause of mysterious bruises, and they make a breakthrough.
The two parallel bruise marks on the elbows were consistent with the handcuffs.
It appears Nadine was handcuffed and held underwater until she drowned. But where are the handcuffs now? Were they brought in by an intruder who took them with him when he fled?
There didn't appear to be anything immediately available at the crime scene that could be responsible for causing those marks.
While cops search for the cuffs, They also search for the intruder, going from mansion to stately mansion.
But all these inquiries drew a blank.
Strangely, no one recalls Alan's evil weirdo lurking in this grand neighborhood.
There was nothing to verify or back up Alun Phillips' story about the confrontation that night.
Two other things puzzle police. If it was a bungled burglary, why is nothing missing from the £1 million mansion? And why hasn't the burglar left a trace?
They could find no evidence of forced entry, no evidence of trampling in the garden, and that definitely, I think, led to suspicions that his story didn't really stack up.
Police take Alun Phillips down to the station for more in-depth questioning. But the formerly talkative husband has fallen strangely silent.
If you're a grieving husband, you would have thought you'd do everything you could to ascertain who had murdered your wife. And saying no comment to every question is not too helpful.
Back at the house, cops scour every inch of the Phillips mansion. And down in the basement, they find items unbecoming of an upper-class English gent.
Leather belts, whips.
We found in her bag marked fancy dress.
A lavish wedding in 1992 held such promise for Alun Phillips and his blushing bride, Nadine. But just 7 years later, in a posh suburb of southwest London, Nadine is found dead in the bath. She's drowned, but there's evidence of foul play.
We found some linear bruising towards the top of the arm above the elbow.
Police have a chilling suspicion the marks were made by handcuffs. But where are those handcuffs now?
And while searching the house in the basement, we found a bag marked fancy dress.
Nadine's husband, Alun, says the bag's contents are his.
Leather belts, whips, and other bits and pieces which he'd collected from his student punk days.
And the bag contains something else.
These handcuffs fitted the marks on the arms. It was at that stage when police were fairly sure that the murderer came from within the house.
With no evidence of an intruder in the house and the handcuffs discovered in Alun's own bag, police charged the millionaire with the murder of his wife. But Alun continues to claim a lone intruder is the real killer.
He'd also kept a collection of press cuttings of other intruder murders and intruder dangers from around the local area, apparently to bolster his case that an intruder had broken in and committed the murder.
In court, the prosecution lays out what they believe happened on the night of May 15th, 2000.
The last time we can prove Nadine Phillips was alive was 8:37 in the evening when she spoke to a friend on the telephone.
Sometime before midnight, Alun lies in wait for his wife.
We could only surmise that she was running a bath in her ensuite bathroom when Alun Phillips attacked her. And he half throttled her, so she was semi-conscious, handcuffed her, then held her under the water.
No! You did this to us! Look out, both!
The only thought you can have for what's going through Nadine Phillips's mind at this point is sheer terror. It appeared that Alun Phillips took the handcuffs off his wife's body and put them in a plastic bag in the cellar.
And went off to his bedroom, leaving the kids presumably asleep on the first floor while he was in his soundproofed room on the second floor.
Just before 8 a.m. the next morning, Prosecutors say Alun calmly prepares their 6-year-old daughter for school.
So Daddy got her ready for school, and off she went in the bus.
It's believed Alun's desire to kill was sparked by his wife's threat of divorce.
We believe it was the fact that he was going to inherit roughly about £15 million. And if he went through a messy divorce, he would obviously lose quite a bit of his inheritance.
And if handcuffs and a motive aren't enough to sway the jury, prosecutors have one more ace up their sleeves. Alun Phillips' own words.
Speaking to friends afterwards, he'd said that rather than go through a messy divorce and lose his kids or risk losing his kids, he'd kill his wife. And he even told one friend he'd say a stranger broke in and killed her while he was asleep in his room. That is what he told us. A stranger had broken into the house and killed his wife.
Throughout the trial, the 36-year-old heir maintains his innocence.
He wasn't remorseful and maintained throughout that it was a stranger that broke into his house. And he thought that he was too intelligent to be convicted. But he was sadly wrong from his own point of view.
In November 2000, 6 months after Nadine's death, Alun Phillips is found guilty of murder. The judge labels the heir a cold-blooded killer.
When the verdict was read out guilty, he collapsed in a chair. Couldn't believe that he'd been found out, if you like. I understand he had a celebration party already booked for his acquittal. So it was a bit of a shock to him.
As he stands before the judge to be sentenced, Alun finally comes clean. He admits the death of his wife came by his own evil hand.
He subsequently confessed. The judge wasn't too impressed that he was remorseful and thought he'd confessed just purely to lessen his sentence.
It doesn't work. The judge sentences Alun to life in prison. The fairy tale marriage that promised so much delivers only tragedy. A mother snatched from her children by the hand of greed.
Clearly the most disturbing part of this crime was the 3 girls who were left behind, who no longer had a mother and had a father who they will know was convicted of their mother's murder.
And his claim was that he was dedicated to his children, but in fact, he didn't care what happened to them because of the actions he took, all for the sake of money.
In a final twist, while Alun is in custody, his rich father dies, giving Alun the dubious honor of being Britain's richest inmate.
He was going to inherit a fortune, and this was, as one newspaper said, Britain's richest convict.
A huge inheritance is a passport to privilege, but a rich birthright can also be a deadly curse. Peter Dabish turned from indulged heir to brutal assassin, and Alun Phillips chose murder over sharing his millions. When these wealthy sons stained their family tree with blood, they both became heirs to misfortune. Till next time we meet behind mansion walls, I'm Christopher Mason.